Hi everyone. I'm very happy to report to you that this month marks the 1-year anniversary of my podcast. Yay! I started my podcast in July of 2023, so 1 year has passed at the time of this episode. Thank you very much for listening and for supporting my podcast. Today, I would like to talk about why I started my online activity, which is focused on foundational skills in life sciences. I'm not doing any social media, at least for now, and my website is present, but it's not functional yet. By the way, when it starts working, I will let you know in the podcast. So my online activity now means only this podcast channel. In another episode in the future, I want to talk about why I chose podcasting specifically as my main online activity. Today, I will talk about why I started my online activity or podcasting. I will talk about my story in 6 phases. The single take-home message out of this story is that I would like to help you. The first phase, my training. Let me start by talking about my experience when I was much younger. I started scientific research when I was a graduate student. I had no research experience before, and I did not have much opportunity to talk with researchers in any field before. So when I started research, I wanted to talk with the researchers in the lab. I wanted to listen to them. I wanted to learn many things. For example, what they are thinking about every day, what their successful experiments were, how they did them, what the thought processes were, what their failed experiments were, how they did them, what the thought processes were, and what they found interesting and what they found not interesting, how they wrote papers, and so on. I wanted to know anything about science, how science is done, how science proceeds, and the intellectual or practical manual activities behind science. I wanted to listen to them because I knew almost nothing about science. If you are my good listener, you will find good examples in my episodes. A recent example would be our episodes on the story about a pilot experiment that failed at first, but was made successful after troubleshooting. Here are the keywords as reminders: the negative controls and the serum in the culture medium. I also added many professors' viewpoints to those episodes. My episodes would be very interesting to my young self. I hope they are interesting to you too. But at the time, when I was a graduate student, I could not have good conversations with the lab members or my mentor. Even when I could, the conversations tended to be short and superficial. I could not learn much. Then there was one symbolic opportunity. I happened to chat with a senior member in the lab. I thought that was a good opportunity because in the lab meetings, he showed his outstanding knowledge and ideas, and his comments appeared to be deep to me. At the time, I was reading one of the most important landmark papers in neuroscience. I wanted to ask him one question that I had in mind about the paper. The paper was written by Nobel laureates Hodgkin and Huxley. It is a beautifully written paper, combined with rich experimental data and theoretical predictions. I understand the content now, but I found it challenging to understand as a young reader. So I asked him one question that was important to me about the paper. Then he said, quote, "Your question means that you did not understand the paper. So your question is not worth asking, and I do not need to answer it." Close quote. And the conversation ended there abruptly. That was like a slap in the face. I was very shocked to hear it. No guidance, no discussion, simple dismissal. It was like a door closing right in front of me. After that experience, I had no idea about what to do. One constructive thing for me to do could have been to ask the same question to someone else in the lab or outside the lab. But I was discouraged, and the internet was not available yet for searching for information and comments. That lab was almost all of my world. I learned 3 things out of that shocking experience. It took me time to realize these, and I learned them very slowly. That was because I did not know whom to ask or even what to ask, and because there were no training courses or any opportunities available for me. I had to learn them all by myself. These are the 3 lessons. The first lesson was that what the senior scientist told me may be true. In order to understand a paper, I need to read it many times very carefully to fully absorb it. When I look back, it was a good experience. That experience changed my mindset about reading papers. I became very serious about reading. I established the principle of my training: read papers myself and understand the details by reading many times and thinking many times. Most of my questions will be answered by reading the papers and the papers cited therein. This first lesson was about my own training, and this lesson is a core principle that is still true with me. Read and think to understand the paper. The second lesson was not about my own training, but about an interaction with other people. When I am asked a question about papers that I understand well, I would be kind to the person who asks me a question, and I would guide the person so that the person can understand well. This lesson or principle is still true with me. The third lesson was that it was difficult to talk with researchers about science. I was a beginning scientist without experience. I wanted to hear stories about science, but there were only limited opportunities for conversations, and most scientists around me did not spend time in interacting with a beginning scientist like me. Unfortunately, this third lesson, or a lack of conversations with scientists, remained the same for a long time, that is, during my graduate school years and during my postdoctoral years. I was not satisfied with this situation. The second phase, conversations in my own laboratory. So after I became independent as a faculty member in a university in the US and started my own lab, I wanted to be the one who talks about what I wanted to learn when I was younger. I talked with my laboratory members. Over the years, the members in my laboratory included undergraduate students, graduate students, postdoctoral researchers, research scientists, visiting scientists, and technicians. I tried making time, and I spent at least 1 to few hours a week with each member. I talked about research projects. Each lab member had a different project, so the content of the scientific discussion about the project was different. But on top of that, I had additional topics. The topic was based on the level of a lab member. For example, undergraduate students and postdoctoral researchers have totally different experience and understanding, so every topic needs to be tailored to the lab member. I liked this activity of scientific discussions and conversations. I hope they liked talking with me too. The third phase, personal losses. Then in 2019, I had major personal incidents. Both of my fathers, my father and my father-in-law, passed away. The losses were big incidents for me. I started thinking about life. What is my life? What can I do in my life? What can I do in my scientific life? I did not have a clear answer at the time, but slowly my answers became clear to me. I will give you one answer in relation to my podcast. It is to help other people or other researchers within my capability. Naturally, the next question came to my mind. If that is the meaning of my scientific life, how can I achieve it? The fourth phase, COVID-19 pandemic. Then the COVID-19 pandemic hit very early in 2020. That was soon after the funeral of my father-in-law. The university activity was shut down. My laboratory activity was shut down. Gradually, I started thinking this way. I have been focused on doing research in my lab and training my lab members. How about contributing to the trainees outside my lab? How can I extend my contribution to outside my lab? The fifth phase, extending beyond my laboratory after pandemic. After the university activities resumed slowly, I started contributing to the activities outside my lab, but still within my institution. I will tell you 3 examples. The first activity was to give written feedback to presentations by graduate students in my department and in the graduate program of neuroscience. The graduate students give oral presentations about their progress periodically. One student will spend about 20 to 30 minutes each time. I attended those presentations, and after each presentation, I wrote to each student. The content was something like, quote, "The 5th slide is your most important slide in your talk. The slide was well crafted, but it would have been better if you added a major question and your major hypothesis in that slide," close quote. Or, quote, "You explained the graph very carefully, including what the x and y axis meant, so that people outside your field could understand them well," close quote. My comment was usually half a page to 1 page long. After the presentation, I sent my feedback to the student by email. Do you know how the students responded? They loved it. I will show you 3 examples. Quote, "Your feedback has substantial value to me, and I really appreciate you reaching out to share your thoughts and suggestions. Your advice for improving the early part about disease relevance resonates with my experience writing and presenting that part. It did not come together well, and I focused too much on the data rather than the fundamental introduction. Your point that it is my prime opportunity for engaging the audience is well received, and you have given me some specific, actionable ways for doing so," close quote. Another student responded, quote, "Thank you very much for the feedback. I have heard from other graduate students how valuable your feedback is. It is very helpful to get feedback from a faculty member," close quote. Another student forwarded my comments to the student's mentor. The professor wrote to me, quote, "It was incredibly thoughtful and kind for you to write that. Thank you. And your comments precisely hit points that make a talk generally accessible to any audience," close quote. The second activity outside my lab was giving written feedback to presentations by postdoctoral researchers in my department. Postdoctoral researchers, or postdocs, already have PhD degrees, and they are further trained to become more ready in academia, in the industry, and in other fields. So the presentations by postdocs are different from those of the graduate students. Their presentations are not just progress reports. They're also training opportunities, such as job talks for job applications. Accordingly, my feedback to them was different from the feedback to graduate students. Of course, there are common aspects, but I added some special comments about the specific needs of the postdocs. Do you know how the postdocs responded? They loved it. I will show you an example of the postdocs' feedback to my feedback. Quote, "I really appreciate you taking the time to both attend my talk and provide incredibly helpful feedback. This really means a lot to me and will greatly help me as I improve this presentation for job talks in the coming months." Close quote. The third activity outside my lab was training medical students. There were journal club presentations in small groups. Medical students chose published clinical papers that they wanted to read, and they presented them to other medical students. After their presentations, I showed my comments about the papers. I behaved as if I were a peer reviewer of the published papers. My peer review reports were 1 to 2 pages long. The students learned before that it is important to read medical literature critically, but I knew that they have not learned how to read critically. So instead of explaining what a critical reading is, I simply showed the individual processes of my critical reading and the results of them. Do you know how the medical students responded? They loved it. I will show you 3 examples of their feedback to my feedback. The first 2 were anonymous feedback, so I do not know who wrote them, and they know that I do not know them. So I think their feedback is true. Quote, "One of the most profound lessons I have ever had about how to really read and analyze a scientific article was given in the journal club. Dr. Synaptologica," well, the students called my real name, "completely tore down what we all believed to be a sound and trustworthy article. I have never been taught how to properly read a scientific paper, and I can honestly say I will take that knowledge and healthy skepticism with me all throughout my medical career as I read through papers from now on." Close quote. Another student wrote, quote, "I would truly recommend that Dr. Synaptologica have a required lecture session in one of the courses to share his knowledge with all medical students, as I can say that my group members and I genuinely gained so much knowledge." Close quote. One student even wrote a handwritten thank you card on the last day of the semester and gave it to me. The student wrote, quote, "I just wanted to thank you for a very wonderful and enriching semester. I learned so much about appropriately deciphering the trustworthiness of an academic paper, which is something that I had never thought I would truly learn how to do. You made looking at papers fun, exciting, and deeply interesting, which I also really did not think was possible. Thank you for putting so much time into our journal club peer reviews and more generally into us. I appreciate you so much." Close quote. Overall, I received great feedback from the graduate students, postdocs, and medical students. Their feedback told me that they had not received good enough training about some foundational skills in life sciences. Their feedback was a strong motivation for me to do more. But still, my activity has been limited to a small part within my institution. The 6th phase, podcasting. I wanted to extend my activities to a wider audience, more outreach outside the institution. How to do that? My answer was podcasting, and you're listening to my episodes now. My hope is that you will learn many important skills that are foundational by listening to my episodes. Professor's viewpoint. I would like to give you one comment here. The message of this viewpoint is that the content of my podcast episodes will be relevant to you. We know that individual experiences are different among individual people and individual scientists. Soon after I became a professor, I had thought that my experience would be different from my colleagues' experiences. But I learned gradually, over several years, that the individualized experiences by many scientists can often funnel into common shared features. Those common destinations or lessons seem similar among us professors, unknowingly and interestingly. Of course, there can be some differences, but overall, I learned that many professors thought and felt in a similar way. For example, this happened when we evaluated award proposals for graduate students, when we evaluated oral presentations by other researchers, when we peer-reviewed manuscripts, and when we peer-reviewed grant proposals. My podcast episodes are mostly based on my own experience, but I believe that the core aspect of most of my experiences will be shared with other experts in life sciences. This is the reason why I wanted to share my experiences with you. It would be great if you listen to them. It is up to you whether you accept them or not. However you respond, I wanted to give you some of my experiences to think about. Please feel free to extract what is valuable to you. This is it for today. Summary. A single take-home message today is that I would like to help you. The reason why I started my podcasting was because I would like to help you with the skills necessary in life sciences. The direct motivation came from the very positive, happy feedback from the students and postdocs that I helped in my institution. I hope that I can help you too. Your action. If you like my podcast, please share it with your friends, colleagues, mentors, or anybody who would be interested in it. This way, you and I can extend the reach. The bigger the audience becomes, the more feedback we can get, the better the episode quality will grow, and the more you and I can learn. Thank you for joining me in today's episode of Foundational Skills in Life Sciences. I'm Dr. Synaptologica. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.